Hi, y'all. I'm Atticus, a bookseller at Literati Bookstore and the host for tonight's event. This evening, we are pleased to welcome Eve Rodsky and Catherine Price to our At Home with Literati series in support of Find Your Unicorn Space, Reclaim Your Creative Life in a Too Busy World. For our attendees, the chat is closed, but I will be dropping links to purchase Find Your Unicorn Space throughout the event. You can also use the Q&A feature on your toolbar to submit questions at any time. And then I will ask a selection of them at the conclusion of the event. A reminder that you can shop for more books in store or at Literati Bookstore for curbside pickup and shipping to your home anywhere in the United States. And now allow me to introduce tonight's author and moderator. Eve Rodsky is the New York Times bestselling author of Fair Play, a game-changing solution for when you have too much to do and more life to live. She received her BA in economics from anthropology Sorry. She received her BA in economics and anthropology from the University of Michigan, go Blue, and her JD from the Harvard Law School. After working in foundation management at JP Morgan, she founded the Philanthropy Advisory Group to advise high net worth families and charitable foundations on best practices for harmonious operations, governance, and disposition of funds. In her work with hundreds of families over a decade, she realized that her expertise in family meditation, strategy, and organizational management could be applied to a problem closer to home, a system for couples seeking balance, efficiency, and peace in their home. Rodsky was born and raised by a single mom in New York City and now lives in Los Angeles with her husband and their 3 children. Catherine Price is an award-winning science journalist and speaker and the author of numerous books, including How to Break Up with Your Phone and Vitamania, How Vitamins Revolutionize the Way We Think About Food. She is also the creator of Screen Life Balance, a resource hub dedicated to helping people scroll less and live more. Her work has appeared in various publications, including The Best American Science Writing, The New York Times, the Oprah Magazine, Popular Science, The Los Angeles Times, San Francisco Chronicle, The Washington Post Magazine, Slate, Time, and Men's Journal, among others. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Eve and Catherine.
Thank you very much. That was a fun intro. I felt like I was on a game show. Thank you. And of course, your name has to be Atticus if you love books, because what a great name.
And you are on a game show.
All right. Well, we'll announce the prizes later. So thank you everyone for coming to join us for this conversation. I'm absolutely thrilled to be moderating and be in conversation with Eve because I am both a fellow author, but also a huge fan. So I have my copies. Her books right here on my table. And I had found out about Fair Play actually before it came out from my agent when I was talking with him about something else. And he actually said, you should really be aware of this book that's coming up that I think is going to be a huge hit. Very prescient, my agent, and that I think you'll really enjoy. And he told me about Fair Play and I devoured it. And it really changed my husband and my life. We already had a really equitable relationship and a wonderful relationship. But I think that Fair Play really made us realize areas where we were perhaps holding resentment towards each other or where we didn't feel like we had equality and fairness. And we actually started our own Fair Play practice where we met every Monday in this lovely coffee shop. This was before the pandemic. And we used Trello and we'd go through our cards and we would assign each other tasks. We still use the terminology from the book. We still use the system. So if anyone out there hasn't read it, you totally should. And one of the things that really jumped out to me in the book was this concept of unicorn space. And it very much, the Fair Play is in my book, The Power of Fun, and unicorn space definitely struck a nerve with me when I read about it in Fair Play. So you can imagine my delight when I found out that Eve was writing a whole book about it, which we're here to talk about tonight. So all that is to say, I recommend Fair Play to everybody I know. I can't even tell if there's like a Philadelphia spike in sales, like I'd like to take credit for it. And I'm really excited to speak with you tonight about finding our unicorn space. So the first thing I wanted to jump in to ask you about is just if you can tell us a bit more about, to frame the conversation, Fair Play and how Fair Play led to you writing Unicorn Space.
Such a great question. And again, I feel the exact same about your work. And I think it's, we're trying to spark a cultural movement here, right? So it's fun and important to have spiritual friends along that journey. And Catherine, I consider you that. So again, thank you for being here. And hopefully we can do a lot of fun things together. I think what was so interesting to me, because I'd say, on my third grade board in PS40, Catherine, when, it said, what do you want to be when you grow up? It definitely didn't say gendered division of labor specialist. That wasn't there. It was probably more like astronaut or veterinarian. But a lot of what happened to me in the past 10 years, I think they call research me search, but starting with the idea of fair play, where, this awakening happens to me from a text Seth sends me, I'm surprised you didn't get blueberries. And sort of this low point in my life after my second son, Ben, was born. That I talk a lot about that in fair play, but what I think it connects to in unicorn space is this idea of erasure. And so you talk about that in your book too, this idea that, bringing back fun, these concepts that it's sort of subversive. And I remember that distinctly when Zach was born, my first son, he's 13, he was handed to me in the hospital. And it was the first time I'd been sort of called something other than Eve. The labor and delivery nurse said, hi, mom. Good morning, mom. And then the same week, I remember a friend came to that hospital and brought me a necklace that said mom on it. It was the time of those little charm necklaces. And I remember putting it on proudly. And then you cut to this preschool class I was in. I remember we had to sit in this circle as the primary parent. And of course, it was all mothers and a couple of gay fathers. And we're sitting in this circle. And I remember this preschool teacher looking at us, and we're wearing these name tags. And mine said Zach's mom. And this woman says, look around. You're going to be with these people for 10 years. They're going to know you better than anyone. You're going to be at all their milestones. And I remember thinking, Catherine, how are these people going to know me better than anybody else that's ever known me? They don't even know my name. And I think it was an understanding that society was trying to erase me. It was trying to erase me in my roles as a parent and or a partner and or a professional. And I think for me, the fight back to the division of labor in my home was really actually a fight for my identity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that really resonates with me. I think that, often when I've done interviews for my various stuff, I've noticed that people will identify me as a mother, and I've actually spoken up and asked them to take that off, not because I don't, please. Dearly love my daughter, but I'm like, you just wouldn't do that. I don't think with a guy, you wouldn't say father is the first thing. And it's not my primary identity, but I completely hear what you're saying. From the moment that anyone finds out you're pregnant, suddenly it's all about, oh, you're a mama and all this stuff. And I was just thinking about Mother's Day the other day, and I'm still thinking about it in terms of my own mother, not in terms of me, which again is not because I don't love my daughter. But so how did that lead to the concept of unicorn space? So you went through this process of figuring out a system for us to create more equality in our marriages and our relationships, but what was the connection between these two concepts?
Well, I think it was honoring the data, because for me, it was really important as a lawyer. The way I look at the world, I always think it's funny, Catherine, that people are sort of on this design, how to design your life bandwagon, because the truth is, like, if you want to design anything in the society, the people who are designing it are the lawyers, right? You want people to stop at a stop sign. You pass a law to get them to do that. You don't want people to vote in Georgia. Guess what you're going to do? You're going to be passing a law. And so I think about design all the time. How we make our decisions. It's a big part of my daily practice. Thank you, Atticus, for, saying that my day job for a long time has been to be an advisor to families that look like the HBO show Succession. You should feel bad for me, Catherine, because it's weirder than even the show. But looking at how we design, how we make our decisions was really interesting. And when I would ask people, well, who's making your decisions? I would ask them that for fair play, because it was really, but what's coming out of it is this idea that women were basically telling me they don't make their own decisions. Society makes their decisions for them. Their partner makes their decisions for them. Schools make their decisions for them. Well, my day is only decided if, the school calls, my kid is sick, my day is disrupted, right? It's this idea that externally, all these people are making decisions for marginalized populations, and for women. And so I don't want to live in a system like that. So I want to fight for systemic change where we can make better decisions because we have safety nets like paid leave and universal childcare. But in the moment, we still have to, we're breathing polluted air, but we have to breathe. And so the idea that that so many women in 17 countries were identifying with identity loss, and also that their decisions were being made by other people, made me feel like I needed to push back against this erasure of our agency. And that's sort of where the idea for Unicorn Space came in. It has, a lot of alignment with the power of fun, in that there is power in being interested in your own life. There's a lot of power in that. And that's, I think, what the true antidote to burnout is. I think we are past the walk around the block. We are past the drink with a friend. I think you need to be interested in your own life and to feel you're in love with yourself, that you're having fun, that you are alive. The words that people associate with a unicorn space, an active pursuit that makes them is I'm alive again. I'm breathing. Those are things we want in a society, especially for women. When typically we've always been defined by our roles.
I love that line about being in love with your life and with yourself. So can you give us a definition of what you mean when you refer to unicorn space?
Yeah, so it was interesting how I came to this title or this concept, because first it started with the idea of space. People were saying they didn't have any time or space. So I was thinking a lot about the space-time continuum, like, starting with Virginia Woolf, this idea of a metaphysical, a mental, and a physical, literal, metaphorical room of one's own, and how, women couldn't be Shakespeare because we don't have that space to tinker, to ideate. And then I was thinking about these toxic cultural messages we get around multitasking, that for this sort of this decade of boss bitch feminism that hopefully is coming to an end was all about like, how much can you get done simultaneously? And so that to me was such the opposite of what I was finding, that a unicorn space is really sustained attention, that's a weapon. When you can have sustained attention, whereas the opposite of that is multitasking, interruption. And during the pandemic, women were interrupted there was a time use study that said women were interrupted every 3 minutes. Caregivers were interrupted every 3 minutes and 42 seconds.
It seems like a long period of time.
That actually does. Right? I mean, it's probably more like 70 seconds for me.
Yeah. Yeah.
So I think, retiring this complicit in our own oppression, pride and multitasking, along with understanding that a new weapon can be attention and space. So that's how space came about.
Yeah. And
then unicorn was interesting because at first, when I was asking people during Fair Play about white space, do they have white space? A lot of the people of color that I interviewed said, I don't really like that term because a white space sounds like a place that I can't occupy.
Right.
So
like
I didn't really
House,
like, yeah. So the idea of this white space, do you have white space in your life? It just started to feel uncomfortable using that term.
It also just seems empty as opposed to something that's
right. I don't know. Right. Just, I guess a blank canvas is good. Right. But there was, I don't know. I just got uncomfortable. I just stopped liking that term.
Yeah.
And then the idea was, well, what kind of space am I talking about? And I was like, well, it's magical, it's mythical, but it doesn't fucking exist. So that's the idea of a unicorn. It actually is, it doesn't exist. Unicorns don't exist. My kids
do not tell my daughter that. Okay.
Right?
Don't.
Well, that's what Anna asked all the time. Do unicorns really exist? Where are they? Where can I see them? Are they in the zoo?
Right.
So I sort of like this metaphor that there's this thing out there that really is beautiful and magical, AKA fun, but that it doesn't exist until we actually claim it. And so I think that's why, your subtitle, right? How to feel alive again, or fall in love with yourself. It's so aligned, right? Because the question, ironically, that I asked people was, what do you do that makes you feel most alive? So I like, that's why I said, I think our being together in this, in this time and space to be able to allow people the permission to be unavailable from their roles to come alive again is very important and very subversive and actually very triggering. I don't know if you feel that way, Catherine. I'd love to ask you that question. Do you find that people are triggered by some of the concepts in your book?
I've told people, I mean, I've heard people say to me when they read the prologue to my book, one woman who was interviewing me for an article, she said, I cried, and I get it, because I think that one thing people are not expecting when they read a book about fun is that it can get really existential really quickly, which is why I wrote it. I had a moment, I'd written my book, How to Break Up with Your Phone. I'd freed up spaces by creating better boundaries with my devices. I had all this extra space, the white space you're talking about, the blank space. But I realized I didn't know what to do with it. To me, that's the distinction between that blank space and the unicorn space, right? Because it's like you have this emptiness, but I'd gotten used to having it filled by someone else, which was whoever was designing whatever app I was looking at. Yeah. And I didn't have a word for it. I didn't have fun as a word, and I didn't have unicorn space as a word when I did this, but I asked myself a question I invite all of our viewers to ask themselves too, which is, what's something you always say you want to do, but supposedly don't have time for? And in my case, my answer was the guitar. I wanted to learn how to play the guitar, and I ended up learning the guitar, but it was something much more profound about it, which is, I think, exactly what you're getting at with unicorn space. It's not necessarily just about the doing of the thing or the skill you're acquiring. It's the feeling it's giving you and the other effects it has. But what I find, I mean, the second or the third chapter of my book is called something like Why You Feel Dead Inside, right?
Right.
So I guess I knew it was going to be somewhat provocative, but I didn't realize how much so. So to answer your question, yes, I think that when we slow down, there's a great quote, I think it's from Viktor Frankl. It's about the Sunday neurosis and what happens to us when we actually slow down. And it's when the void within ourselves becomes manifest.
Yeah.
And I was like, oof,
right.
Damn. Right. Like, that's terrifying. And I think that probably is what keeps some people back from claiming their unicorn space also. But I want to back up for a second, because I wanted to just really explore this idea of what unicorn space is and what it isn't a bit more with you. Because when I was reading Fair Play, that was something that really stood out to me about how we often conflate things like self-care with unicorn space. And one of the stories that I found very poignant in Fair Play was when you were talking about interviewing people about whether their partner or their spouse made them proud, or what were they proud of. And that when you asked, and I know we're going to speak in broad gender stereotypes here, but when you were speaking to men and asking them about their wives, when they said, yeah, I'm proud of her, the first thing they said was, for a reason, was because she's a great mom. And then when you asked, well, what else are you proud of? A lot of people drew a blank, which I thought was really powerful. And you referred to that as the case of how did you put it? The case of the headbends, or the
used
to be's, the used to's, the case of the she used to's. And I was wondering if you could tell us a bit about what you mean by having a case of the she used to's, and how that relates to unicorn space, which, as I understand it, is really the creative expression that you share with the world that makes you. That likely was part of the reason that you fell in love with yourself, but also that other people fall in love with you, was your unicorn spirit. So yeah, if you can talk a bit about the case of the she used to's.
And nobody has asked me that before. And again, it's why, I ask you to come along with me on every stop. Because I think that's actually really profound, to sort of connect the concepts, because they're very interrelated. Similar to you, I like to ask provocative questions or say provocative things. And in the course of the Fair Play research, we started to have really interesting, we probably have the longest longitudinal study of unpaid labor. We're actually now trying to get it peer reviewed through my friend Darby Saxby at the Center for the Changing Family.
Nice.
We just have so much data. It's just a waste. We want to, not a waste, it's great for the public, but we'd like for it also to make its way into the journals.
Right.
And in this data, one of the questions I started to iterate on probably a year into asking questions in couples was, are you proud of your partner? And again, in a hetero cisgender relationship, when a man had kids, sociologists call this the saturation point, where you can start predicting what people are saying. Once you can start predicting what people are going to say, you can stop researching. So it became like a broken record. Well, she's an amazing mother. Okay. Okay. That's a role. So let's keep going. well, why else are you proud of your partner? Well, I couldn't do it without her. Okay, so now we have mother, we have personal assistant. That's great. The kids keep going. Um, what else? And then there was always this pause. If somebody didn't have an active unicorn space, there was a pause. And then this, she was Phi Beta Kappa. I met her when she was a Lakers, Knicks City dancer. She used to enter these really cool pie competitions. I don't know. My heart started pounding. Like, and I knew that there was something really triggering in this case of the she used to's, because not because I'm saying to women that I want to shame you for not being interesting. I'm not saying that at all. What I'm saying is that it would often correlate to when I didn't always get both people in the couple, but when I did, it would often correlate to self-worth issues that were being admitted to by the other person.
What do you mean?
Like, I feel dead inside. Like, I would hear that if the person who they were partnered with couldn't think of what made them proud about the person. Whereas if somebody had unicorn space, how I knew it was different than self-care is because I never heard somebody say, oh my God, I'm so proud of her. she took a bike ride this morning.
She takes the best baths.
Yeah, she takes the best baths. And with lots of bubbles. Like, self-care
wasn't of wine.
Right. It wasn't evoking that. And also people weren't saying that about themselves when they talk about their aliveness, where you talk about, their pride. Self-care can be relaxing. It's not the fun that we're talking about, these active pursuits where you're like, wow, I'm really having fun right now. A lot of that happens more in a unicorn space, in a active pursuit. And so I was starting to notice those differences. And then I started to look into some of the research. And then I found this interesting thing about happiness and meaning, that, a lot of times happiness and meaning correlate, but there are times when it doesn't. And when happiness comes without meaning, and people report that, it's often hedonistic pleasures, or even self-care, a glass of wine, self-care being a binge of a Netflix show. And then there was times where it was meaning without happiness. For me, that's literally all day taking care of my kids. As my mother used to say, TGIM, because, my heart pounds on the weekends. I'm like, I don't know how I'm going to get through these 2 days of just caregiving. So that's existential meaning without happiness. But when you can get in this place, this zone of experience where happiness and meaning sort of intersect, that's a very special zone. It doesn't have to happen all the time, but it can't be a hobby that just you pick up sometimes. It's your guitar playing. Darby, ironically, the partner in crime at the Center for
She's
Changing
in that
Family.
band, the Dolly Mamas.
She's the Dolly Mamas.
Say no more. I was I need to be friends with this person.
She's by the way, and she has the best division of labor ever, because that's what she does for a living. She's fair play times a million, but her and her partner both have these amazing unicorn spaces. And she always talks about that, it's not just the recital and that's, you don't do it necessarily for others, but the beauty of a unicorn space is that you feel so compelled to share it however you want to. It doesn't have to be my friend is now opening for Eric Clapton. I mean, it doesn't have to be that. Because she says sex is so much better now in leather pants. She's a singer, and she was somebody who was an attachment parent and didn't have that pride in herself. And she's back in her full unicorn space. But it could just be as simple as a garage band where you're sharing just with your neighbors. So I think that to me is how I think now about the difference between self-care, even friendship, and unicorn space. It's really an antidote to loneliness. I think your concept, you talk about this too. I think that there's something really beautiful about when people see you having fun, when people see you in your unicorn space, it's sort of like you become a magnet for others.
I think it's really inspirational.
Yeah, you don't have to say, I want a friend. Like, I made friends with Catherine because we met through our mutual loves of writing and feminism. So I don't know, that just seems to what's happening to me. I'm getting more friends on the way because I have more unicorn space.
Well, that just leads me, I've got so many questions and follow-up thoughts on that. I think that one thing that really stood out to me, again, drawing from fair play in particular, was the expression of being interesting and interested. Again, with no judgment, it's not like saying someone's not interesting, but that feeling where you are interesting and interested. It was an expression actually my college roommate brought up to me once, like soon after we graduated, in terms of her life goals, actually. And so when you wrote about it in fair play, I was like, oh my God, yes. But to me, that also encapsulated what people feel when they're in their unicorn space. And I also just love the idea that you are giving a name to something, because I think it helps us talk about things when we have names for them and can avoid resentment. And so I can
Right.
go in a number of different directions here. But the first thing I just wanted to ask is if you can give some examples of unicorn space that you've had shared with you, because I know from our previous conversation that you have been collecting some like
I have
weird
binders of
botanist.
women.
She's got like a collecting
Yes.
unicorn spaces. So watch out, everyone, because she might collect you. But can you share some examples that stand out in your mind? I know that for you, dancing and wearing glittery gold sneakers. And by the way, I would totally, if we meet in person, we are going to do a dance class.
We're gonna do it together. I actually have my like advanced, or sorry, advanced beginner jazz, like the gloves.
Yes, she's got the jazz fingers. You have jazz
Jazz
fingers.
hands.
Jazz
Oh
hands.
my gosh, I still have it in my drawer from, I did a class on Zoom. Oh Lord. But yeah, I think, yeah, that was obviously, that's the most fun. I mean, the data on having to listen to thousands now of people explain their gender division of labor is still triggering. It's a harder topic. This, as we said earlier, is still could be a triggering topic, but it also could be just such a beautiful topic. What's interesting is it didn't correlate with privilege the same way I thought it would.
I thought that was very interesting in your book. Yeah, can you speak about that a bit? Because that's a common pushback isn't this just for people who are privileged? Don't you have to have a lot of money or
right, or retired or more time or more money? And it was so interesting. It didn't correlate that way. And again, we have 750 people that are active interviewees in a CRM. I mean, there's a lot of people. So you would expect that there would maybe have been a pattern where I would have also seen that pattern of the more privileged, the more unicorn space. Sure, there's like, I'm sure Jeff Bezos plays golf, there's those people. But what was happening was so interesting. I think some people who identified not in this sort of the 9.9% were articulating to me. And one quote that I use and I love is this spoken word artist, Mark Muthi Joseph, this idea that there's other types of capital. And when you don't have access to financial capital, you see humanity sort of embracing other types of capital. Mm-hmm. And I think that's actually an important point in the time of a disruption where hoarding and lack and selfishness and doom scrolling and like you said, having decisions made for you about where you pay your attention by people who are designing this in late stage capitalism to make money. That's sort of where we've been paying attention. This idea of as sort of a return to other types of capital other than financial capital means that we stop looking at extrinsic motivators like the 2.5 kids and owning a home. All these things we've been told that make us an adult or quote unquote successful. And we start a return to our intrinsic values. And that's an important distinction, this idea that creative capital is a type of capital. And we should start valuing it, to me, I think, as much as financial capital.
Yeah, it's true. If you think about the value that we do or don't place on things like artistic expression or someone who plays music, I'm just thinking about my own grandmother who was she was a single mom. She had my mom when she was 19 and she was a supermarket clerk, and she didn't have a career per se, but she played that's where I got my love of music and dancing, and she prioritized that. And I guess that was her unicorn space. Again, it's interesting to give it a name, right? I just don't think we pay attention to things if we don't have names for them. And I was wondering if you could talk a bit about why you think it might be easier, if you think it's easier for, again, in like a stereotypical relationship where for men to claim this for themselves, do they need a word for unicorn space? Why is it easier? And then why is it so hard for many of us, in particular, many women, to speak up for ourselves and ask or demand unicorn space?
I think that's a great question. So yes, yes, and yes, and all the things. yes, we know that on average, men have more leisure time. And also there's another interesting professor. I don't know if you came across him. I just recently came across him, John, I'm going to butcher his last name, but just Simowitz, I think it is. He's a passion researcher at Harvard
Ooh,
Business School. So
okay.
eventually we should do something with him, but
I feel like business school professors are having more fun than a lot of other professors.
that's what I think.
They're
Yeah,
writing
like
really interesting books about things that don't seem at first to have anything to do with business.
Hun-
That's my comment.
1000%. And so that's
Yeah.
why I will say The Power of Fun is a business book. And I think so is Unicorn Space. And we'll talk about
Yes.
that. But
Yeah.
what was so interesting about him was I came across him through, I guess, or he found me because of the Fair Play. And he asked me what my data was on passion. And I had this, the stuff about pride and roles and all this stuff. And he called it, his name for it was compartmentalization. And he kept saying, it's so strange, men compartmentalize. They're not fathers when they're axe throwers or pilots. There's something really interesting about women. Again, back to this idea where, even though you're a brilliant writer, people are trying to put mom first for you, that women have to take mother with them, or caregiver, or aunt or sister, or daughter, when they do everything else. And so I think that I saw that a lot also in my qualitative interviews. The lack of guilt and shame around taking time for yourself just wasn't there. And I think that's something that women, we have to, and that's why, the first part of this book is not just a creativity book. There are chapters that are about the hurdles. And there's a whole chapter about guilt and shame because
I wanted to ask you about that.
Yeah,
it was so you literally burned yours. So I was hoping you could tell us that story and why you felt that was important to make this metaphor into something that was literal.
Yeah, well, for me, it really was. I think ritual, the idea, the importance of ritual it's a very Jewish thing. We have lots of rituals. And guilt and shame is a big piece of our lives, Catherine, as you know, and it keeps us small, the same way that not having fun keeps us small, the same way that using all your extra time on your phone keeps you small, the same way that spending all your time starving yourself to fit into societal expectations of what your body should look like, keeps you small. And so, breaking out of these systems, as you said, that sort of make our decisions for us, there's, it doesn't happen easily. It's not like, you can just come to fun or unicorn space without some grieving and scars attached. And I think I'll read you. I just got this text before we were coming on here from my friend Emily, and I found it a very powerful. Let me just see if I can find it. I hope she's okay with me sharing. I'm not giving her last name, but she said, I found myself tearing up this morning listening to Unicorn Space. The importance of what you're saying, prioritizing our creative life. I personally am so numbed out with responsibility that first I have to grieve all of those lost years of creativity and an impulse to dream before I can even figure out how to reaccess them. And so part of letting go of guilt and shame is, to me, the processing of grief. And so the way I did it was someone gave Anna a piece of origami paper when she was, I don't know, 2. And I thought that was a weird present because I was like, what 2-year-old can fold origami? So I stole the paper, and there's this beautiful marbled paper. And I actually have, like, it was probably one of these Sharpies, like a silver Sharpie, or one of these types of pens, a glitter pen.
Yeah. Sparkles. It has
sparkles.
Okay.
And I wrote guilt and shame on this piece of paper, and I made it really, really small. And I went outside, and it was before my first book tour, because I was going on the road for 5 months. This is when we did things differently, just in 2019. Yeah. I was going to be on the road on and off for 5 months, and miss birthdays and first days of school, Catherine. I mean, it was pretty intense. So I burned this piece of paper and said, you know what, guilt? You're good to me. I think that's probably how I got on my toxic childhood as a parental child, probably because I felt guilty. I didn't do my homework, so I did it. I needed you, but actually I don't need you anymore. I will bring you back if I do, but please let me let you go. And that act of ritualized burning, along with Dr. Cheryl Gonzalez Ziegler, who I quote in the book, who said, you take, I feel guilty because, and you reframe it as I made that decision because. Those are powerful tools. And so now when that rears up and I say, oh, I feel guilty because I'm not putting Anna to bed, I say, I made that decision because I haven't seen my mom in a month because of COVID. And we're going to go to an outdoor dinner together because I miss my mother. Having that power in your decision-making, it allows you to come to that decision with lots less ambivalence. And I think our kids actually need that. They need to see that we make decisions from places of power.
Yeah. And I think they also need to see us role modeling. I mean, as you point out in your books, what we're trying to convey to them, you can tell them to live their best lives and be themselves and follow their dreams, blah, blah, blah. But if you're not doing that, then it doesn't really count. I mean, I feel grateful to my own parents for always saying that guilt is a really destructive emotion that you only should feel if you actively hurt somebody on purpose. I've tried to hold on to that. But I also loved in the book that you actually give people a warning you should not, because I was just thinking, I've got a candle right here. I could burn my guilt right now. Don't do it inside, guys. Do it outside. There was
don't burn your house down.
Yeah, that's not our goal.
But by the way, how amazing that your parents said that. How did they know to tell you that? Because that's actually a very again, back to, we're sort of, I think staying subversive is sort of what we're doing tonight. How did they know to tell you that?
They both had really screwed up childhoods and they didn't want to repeat that. And they did a lot of parenting classes. We're close to the same age and we both grew up in New York, so they did a lot of parenting classes, and I actually have some of their handwritten notes. And I have a lot of the books that they read when I was a kid that they passed on to me as a parent that I found really useful. And and they've done a ton of therapy. And so that I think has really been wonderful too, to have an open discussion for my whole life. I mean, it's not like, they didn't make mistakes or we didn't screw each other up, but like, I think I'm just very grateful for that. But one question I had for you is, I think for many people, after the tears and after this feeling of mourning what they haven't done or the time that's gone by, is this feeling of paralysis where you don't know. I mean, that's what happened to me when I didn't know what I wanted to do with my newfound reclaimed time. And I'm wondering if you can talk a bit about some of the suggestions you have in your book about how do you even start? Like, if you've forgotten who that unicorn is, how do you find your unicorn again? Where do you begin?
Well, of course, it's that self-talk. So we just talked about it. It's really believing that you have permission to be unavailable from your roles, that you have the time and space to actually think again, to get quiet, to break up with your phone. So I think that self-talk is a really important piece. But when you're actually in that quiet space, what worked a lot in the early data, which started to really work, was a trick, not a trick, but it's a tool I use as a mediator, Catherine. So for years, when I've gone into these HBO shows, Succession type families, often I'm hired because, it's not like you advertise your shingle for this work. It's sort of referral to referral. And I would get referred to somebody through a family office or through another client. And I'd sit with a matriarch or a patriarch. And in the beginning of my practice, I would say things like, okay, well, we're here to talk about succession. What are you thinking? And, you really can't make this stuff up. But many times, Catherine, the person at the other end of the table would say to me, well, I'm not going to die.
You're like, we can discuss many things. That's just
so then it's like crickets. And I was like, Jesus, okay. Where do I go now? So you hired me for succession planning, but you're not going to die. So we're sort of at a, do I just like pack up my things and leave? So what I started to do was my questions got more nuanced as I got more experience in this very niche career as a lawyer that works with, family organizations. And what the questions became more interesting as I did return to people's values, their core values, not a return to what they were as kids, a return to their values as they are right now and as they will be in the near future. And that was more liberating. So I have these values cards that were developed by this mediation group that I'm part of, and values exercises. And so I bring that into unicorn space. This idea, can you identify right now, what are your top 3 values? And even more importantly, what are your bottom 3 values?
Yeah, can you give us an example either for yourself or for, from someone you work with? Because I know in unicorn, Find Your Unicorn Space, you've got a whole page of these values, but can you give us an example of what top 3 and bottom 3 might look like for someone?
Yeah, I did my own exercise as I was rewriting. And for me, it was really understanding that the value of obligation, the duty to something and someone, that's a very Jewish value. And it had been in my life for a long time, an obligation to do to my family, to those around me. And then I really had to think about obligation, this duty to others. And I thought, you know what? I don't feel obliged to wipe asses and do dishes right now. It's just not a value I want to hold with me in the moment. So let Seth hold obligation for a while. So I'm going to retire that value, and I want to bring up justice and community. And so the beauty of that is I could do many things with the values of justice and community, many, 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 many different things. I could have opened a nonprofit. I could do civic engagement, service, run for office. I chose to be curious about why my division of labor wasn't fair and why that was becoming something that I was hearing as a universal problem across socioeconomic status, and also in 17 countries and in every article. So that curiosity about why my life wasn't fair was sort of paired with justice and community. And really the way my curiosity started for fair play, which became my unicorn space, my obsession, my flow state was researching the gender division of labor, started with asking women, what do you do that's invisible? I believe
you call this something else.
Yeah, it's called the shit I do spreadsheet.
Oh, it's a spreadsheet now.
Yeah, it was a spreadsheet.
It's got tabs.
It had 98 tabs, Catherine.
98 tabs. That's a lot of shit you're doing. Okay.
A lot of shit I do. It was actually 2,000 items total of invisible work, to the point where that became my community. Because remember, this was 13 years ago, where all we had was what to expect when you're expecting.
Don't even that. Speaking of things that should be burned. Sorry, but burn
no,
that.
that's right. I mean, that was nothing to expect when I was expecting. Let's talk about the opposite. It was like my child's a jelly bean,
it's not a jelly bean, nor is it a kabocha squash or what's like the butternut squash.
Yes, like, no. I don't want a butternut squash in my body.
Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah.
Also, who's doing the measurements? I was like, do you go to some weird Victorian, anatomy museum and take fetuses in jars and measure it against pea pods? Like, how are they coming up with those
awkward.
Numbers?
Yeah, exactly. Like, how do you know exactly? Because through the ultrasound, I agree with you. It was so not.
But like, are they holding up a squash and under, like jelly on the belly and then like a squash?
The
yeah,
baseball.
That's about right.
Yeah, it was just nothing I to expect when I was expecting. And so the beauty of my first community, because the framework of this idea of a unicorn space is sort of a cycle of curiosity plus connecting with others and then some completions. So you don't live in a graveyard of unfulfilled dreams. So that cycle was happening to me. But it started with this values-based curiosity. And I like the word curious more than I like the word passion or hobby, because passion connotes something static for me, at least. And then hobby, when I actually asked, what do people associate with hobbies? A lot of people said they associated infrequency with it. And I think what we're talking about is daily flourishing. The idea of having fun in your life, a unicorn space, doesn't mean you're always in it. Believe me, I have lots of times where I'm not in a unicorn space mentally or physically, but the experiences of them can't be taken away from me. Mm-hmm. And that becomes our umbrella in these shitstorms, basically, that is life in a pandemic.
I think it's also interesting what you're touching on in terms of how this is not static, that your
right.
values are also not necessarily static. Like, sure, you probably do have some core values that will carry you through your life, but in terms of which ones are priorities in any given moment, that can change, which is a reflection of how we can change. And one thing I think is really interesting is how often adults, and Tom Vanderbilt points this out in his great book, Beginners, the transformative power.
I love Beginners. Yes.
Yeah. But he talks about, we act like we're done. Like we're
done.
These are my values. This is what I do. I don't do these other things. I'm Catherine and I don't play the fiddle. I don't know. I doubt I will play the fiddle because I've got other instruments I want to learn more. But, instead of being like, as you even say in your book too, that, and what we try to say to our own daughter, you don't do it yet, but there's no reason you have to stop, and your priorities can change. And I love what you're saying about the idea of curiosity being a guiding principle, because, it comes from, I used to be a Latin teacher, so I'm a huge dork, but it comes from the Latin word for why, constantly asking why.
100%. I looked at all my root words to make sure that there was not anything toxic in the root. I agree with
passion,
you.
as you may know, comes from suffer. It's from,
100%. I don't want, yes, I cannot believe you're going there. You're
patient
like my
does
soulmate.
too. They're together, patient and passion.
You're like my soulmate because my kids started to study root words. And that also was something that 100%, this idea of like, is there suffering in it? Not that there's not rigor and other things.
And joy and like a passion, the good
right,
passion,
there is.
but yeah.
But I really did like that, the root of the wonder, the why. I think, and also speaking of sort of nerding out, the power of yet, Carol Dweck is interesting to me. I don't know her at all, but Dweck is a Syrian Jewish name. And there's very few Syrian Jewish women scholars because we're newer immigrants and our mothers were sort of taught to marry older men in the vein of, your education doesn't matter and your roles matter. And so my mother broke out of that. And so I just always take a lot of pride that there's this Dweck out there, this Syrian Jewish woman who has created this amazing new idea around mindset that keeps getting validated, by the way. Which is so exciting. Yeah, the growth mindset that you're not a firefighter yet. I'd say those are the most interesting and most fun for me, the people where you realize it's not too late. This woman, Renee Brinkerhoff, I only use last names if people allow me to, but she at 56 said, I'm done being a stay-at-home mom. I'm done being defined by my roles. I'm done being an object at rest. I have a need for speed. And so she became curious about what race car driving would look like. And she realized the best type of race car driving for her would be rally car racing because it's sort of long distance racing and she likes endurance things. And now she's at 67, one of the top rally car racers in the world. She's actually in Antarctica right now, racing on her last continent, and she raises money for child trafficking. She's just an inspiration. And there's so many more people like that. This man, David, called into a radio show from Texas telling me that he took up bull riding in his retirement.
I don't know if I endorse that. I'm going to be honest.
I love David, but he's like, Mrs. Rodsky, I believe in the power of creativity, and my creativity is bull riding. Oh, I love these people. So
it's amazing.
It is just, share with us. For those of you who will listen to this on recording, share with us on DM. We're here. We'd love to hear how you're having fun. We'd love to hear what it looks like for you in a unicorn metaphorical or physical space, because we're on a journey to bring these concepts back and into the forefront of what our life looks like after this great disruption.
Yeah. And also I have a collection too. I should be totally honest and say I collect fun moments from people. So you'll be part of both of our little collections. So if that doesn't weird you out, then we would love to have you. I wanted to
give me two fun moments. Cause I love data. What are two of the fun moments that you feel like were surprising to you?
Well, I think the more surprising that I was in them. Well, one surprising moment from my own life is I've told you this before, but I started taking the drums as a result of playing guitar. And that has been just so fun. I define fun as playful, connected flow. And I absolutely love learning the drums. And then what really surprises me is actually performing with my drum teacher at open mics with this music studio I'm a part of, which is very low stakes. And I think something else that Eve brings up in her book that's so important is to try to let go of perfectionism, to try to just let that inner critic be quiet for a while, to just enjoy yourself for the sake, do things for the sake of doing it. Because we're not perfect, but it's so fun. And just an example that someone else shared with me that I thought was really beautiful, because I think in terms of fun, and I would say also unicorn space, a lot of people feel like it's inaccessible. How do you even start? You have to already be doing well in order to have fun, in order to have unicorn space. And I believe, and I think Eve, you'd probably agree that the opposite is true, that actually making space for your unicorn or making your unicorn space and prioritizing fun helps you to feel better, to 100%. Cope in difficult times such as we're in now. And one example that I thought really illustrated how it doesn't have to be exotic was a story someone shared with me. It's actually a stand-up comedian. This guy shared with me, and he was telling me how he'd recently had true fun just sitting on this park bench with his nephew for 2 hours, just trying to catch falling leaves as they fell off of a tree. And he lit up. I think one of the things that's beautiful to hear people talk about fun, and I would imagine unicorn space as well, is to see people light up when they talk about it. And it's a contagious feeling. I think the reason that both Eve and I are interested in hearing other people's experiences is not just for our desire for data, but it's also really joyful. And I invite everyone out there to have conversations about unicorn space and fun with people in your lives, and just notice, if you ask someone, when do you feel the most yourself? Like, what is your unicorn space? When's the last time you had fun? Just notice what their face looks like when they talk about it. It might take them a bit to figure out what to say, but when they do, just notice that. It's really amazing. And I wanted to touch base with Atticus just to see if we've got any questions from the audience, because I can keep talking to Eve indefinitely, but I'm sure that other people would like to ask questions as well.
So it doesn't look like there's any in there yet, but anybody who's in here, you're welcome to post a little question there before the top of the hour. But you're welcome to keep going. You can share your moments of fun and your unicorn spaces.
Yeah, I want to hear another example of Eve's unicorn.
Yeah,
space.
well, I was going to say that, ending on sort of these, like you said, these umbrellas, these moments. I think I want to just bring up, because I said we would, this idea that I actually want to interview you for a Fair Play for Business book. That's where I'm going next, in sort of understanding the future of work, because I actually think that lighting up that you're talking about, people sharing their fun, is actually really linked to authentic leadership. And I think a lot of leaders are telling me now that they're having a hard time because they're getting these trainings that they have to be empathetic. It's sort of like saying, well, you're lonely, you have to find a friend. It gets really overwhelming because you're then sort of being performative in these things that are supposed to be actual authentic connection. So if you're being performative in authentic connection, why not just do the authentic connection? And what I've found is that by sharing your unicorn space and your moments of fun, you're making authentic connection. So for two examples I have, was one person told me that they like their boss so much more because, and I write about this in the book, because they found out that she had this vintage Singer sewing machine in her Zoom picture. And they were like, what is that? And she's like, well, yeah, I sew doll's clothes for my granddaughter because it's too expensive for her to get all these American Girl doll clothes. And so they're like, you sew doll clothes? Like, it just makes someone more human. Or another one who said that their boss / neighbor enters ugly vegetables, and these, apparently, I never heard of this, but I guess there's a hashtag ugly vegetable competitions where you enter misshapen zucchinis, right? And pumpkins. But this idea of like, oh, you'll come over to see my misshapen gourds and have wine. It was
anything with gourds, I just find
right. It was just, what the hell? But you can't make this up. But people were smiling when they're telling me about their bosses in a way that I never heard people smiling when they talk about their bosses. And so I think what I will end with, and thank you for being here with me, is that there is a lot of links to how we can lead through these concepts.
And I think that leads to what I would say my last question would be, is that it's clear to me that you truly believe, as I do too, that embracing our unicorn space can change not just us, but the world. And I'm wondering if you can elaborate on what you think could happen if we all did prioritize this for ourselves.
Well, it's why I love How to Break Up with Your Phone, because I think that's also a way to make the world a better place. We're in echo chambers right now. So the more you can put down your echo chamber, the more, like I said, I've now fallen in love with David from San Antonio, my new bull riding friend.
Oh yeah.
I think up until last week, I would have said, I will not be friends with one human being that lives in the state of Texas. Right. So it's already making me reevaluate maybe my own beliefs. Right, Catherine? So that's what I think. I think it's these micro moments, the same way I feel like the way we were going to avoid civil war is going super local. In our politics and in our civic engagement, I feel like these micro moments of connection are resistance to the echo chamber.
And I feel like what you're saying also is when we get in touch with our own authentic selves, we tap into our own humanity in a way that allows us to connect with other people at a human level instead of as these categories of people that we might otherwise write off. So
That's what I think, right? Anyway, we can be more than our roles.
Yeah. Well, thank you. I mean, I just recommend this book so highly, both of your books, and it's an honor to get to speak with you about your work and help spread the message to the world.
Thank you. Thank you. And if anybody else has any questions, you can reach us on DM, and this will be played. We'll have it on our social media. And, you know, I love local bookstores. I love Literati. I love this. Ann Arbor is a unicorn space for me. Atticus. I always think about, that's one of my dreams, is working at Literati, like somehow living in Ann Arbor for part of the year, preferably not when it's negative 40 degrees, but,
I was going to say, I'll trade with you. I'll be a writer in LA and you can live here.
Yes, we will trade, but I love where you live. I think there's magic in Ann Arbor. I think it is a giant unicorn space of creativity. And knowledge. So thank you. Thank you for doing this for us.
No, thank you all for being here. This has been lovely. And thank you to everybody else who came to see. There was one question. I'm sorry we didn't get to answer it. But I think we're getting close to the top of the hour. So I want to kind of finish it off here. Thank you, Eve and Catherine. It's been a blast. And thank you everybody for joining us on At Home with Literati. You can find your unicorn space from Literati, which you should. And the link is in the chat. So everybody take care and have a good night.
Bye. Thanks, Catherine. I'll see you hopefully on the other side. Okay.
Yes.
Bye.
All
Bye.
right.
Bye, Atticus.
Goodbye.